Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, which is India's first future tech meets sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted not to have with me Dr. Shamir Khader, who is an AI leader in drug discovery and advanced healthcare. His expertise lies in bioinformatics, big data, biomedical data science, with strong domain experience across the verticals in pharma, biotech, medtech, digital health, precision medicine, genomics, and drug development. Dr. Khader has been earlier part of companies such as AstraZeneca, Philips, and Mayo Clinic. His accolades include one of the 100 leading pioneers of AI drug development by Forbes, Deep Knowledge Ventures, and one of the 16 data scientists making vital breakthroughs in healthcare by Pokit Blog. And he is currently the executive director, global head of data science at Sanofi. So, we really appreciate you taking time and being part of a humble podcast. When we start with COVID, because 2019 COVID happened and we all thought that it'll just take maybe a couple of weeks or maybe max to max a month, but it's still there. It's still mutating. It was the Omicron. Now we have the Omicron BF.7 variant. It's spreading in China. It's spreading in India. Talk to us about COVID virus. How dangerous is the BF.7 variant? And how can we be safe? Or what's the timelines you think a virus like COVID will take to be completely over?
Thank you so much, Eddie, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Humanity has always been in war with infectious disease. Whether you take the plague or the cholera or any other viral diseases or even diseases like malaria or tuberculosis. So we have been in constant war with these type of infectious disease over the years. And what happened with COVID is that COVID had a few challenging scenarios, right? Like the mode of its transmission. Right? Now that we know the disease a little bit better, we know the various ways it could transmit it. And then it also had implications, especially with the earlier, more virulent variants, that the mortality rate. And then these two came together. You have high infectivity rate, and then it also affect a part of that patients who are infected were, at the risk of mortality, especially those who are already sick with some other type of, conditions, whether it's diabetes or cardiovascular disease or cancer or some of the other conditions. So it was really a challenging situation for us. But then, just like you mentioned, it's constantly in that space and time of mutating, because the virus is on its own an intelligent entity. So that molecular intelligence is always trying various ways to make sure that they survive, right? Like, so then what happened with us as humans, we started developing, for example, simple measures like mask to begin with, and then we started developing vaccines against it. We started developing therapies against it. So we now have an arsenal of approaches to target COVID. Right, like we understand the disease, we understand some of the mechanism of the disease. So we have a very successful set of vaccines, not just one vaccine. We have a set of vaccines available. Again, therapies are available for those who are, for example, immunocompromised. We have a certain set of therapies called biologics. For those who are not immune compromised, you have other types of antivirals available. So in a way, with respect to the way things are coming along, especially with the new variant and the news that we are hearing right now, I think follow the instructions from your local government wherever you are. Follow that guidance. Make sure you follow. If there is mask mandate in place, make sure you follow that as well. So it's in a way, we have to apply that it's common sense plus sort of diligence as an individual, because when especially with the B7 variant, that what we are hearing is that it's even more higher infectivity rate. But I'm still yet to see any concrete data on that. These are all the data that I've seen is coming from, again, news outlets. Have not really seen a lot of interesting research articles just yet, because it's new. So the variant is new. People have started to studying this as well. Do you foresee a future where there is no COVID? So my answer for that is it's very difficult to predict that. And there are certain reasons for that. I'll tell you, we try to eradicate certain diseases. For example, polio, right? Like, if we take, for example, in India, or we take TB, we say there is zero polio, right? But still we'll hear that here and there a few cases will pop in here and there. So the problem is we cannot completely contain a living entity. There are certain challenges associated with that. But what we can do is that we can provide an environment where it doesn't get to multiply. If everybody's wearing masks, if everyone have vaccinated, there is not enough opportunity for the virus to to potentially propagate within a given community. So that's one of the way we could. So we definitely see it going down, but would it disappear? I don't think so.
So we have to deal with this COVID virus. Yep. And figure out strategies, or the protocols, and follow the protocols in place so that we can be secure and safe, and be in the hope that someday it might disappear. Now science has really advanced. You mentioned about cholera, malaria, and so many other infectious disease. Now it's taking time, but it's not as dangerous as it was earlier. And there's this dynamics which is played out, which I think is really, really cool. Earlier, I think when a virus happened, for the pharma company to develop and deploy a drug or vaccine would take a process of maybe around 4 to 6 years. But then COVID, something magical happened. The entire process got crunched down, and the development and deployment happened in a couple of months, maybe around 5-6 months or so. Now, the reason for this was obviously because of shared knowledge, a global collaboration. So in this scenario, how is the pharma or the drug companies, how have they been impacted? Is there pressure that if there is another pandemic of sorts which might come, do you think that the pharma companies would take around the same times or lesser to develop a drug and deploy? So what's the impact of this?
Yeah, so you've said that in a right sense that pharma is a very challenging in a way business area with very slow and low ROI. What I meant by that is it takes, like you said, 4 to 6 years is really on a hopeful side, but typically take 4 to 10 or 12 years. And if you compute all the facets of drug development, that includes preclinical, clinical, as well as post-clinical, the entire quantum of investment will come around $2 billion for a successful drug molecule. Now, what has been historically done in the field is that can we use data, or can we use computing, can we use simulations, can we use other types of methods and approaches in parallel to experimental setup, so we can reduce time in each of these milestones? Can we do preclinical research faster? Can we do clinical research faster? Can we get the drug to the market faster? Can we find what happens in a post-market scenario faster? So we have been, historically been applying computers in biomedicine to solve some of these problems. We developed a machine learning solution. We developed a protein model, and then we used that for understanding that particular disease mechanism called neurodegeneration. That was 20 years ago. If you think about it, 18 to 20 years ago. But now what happens in pharma is that we have access to computing, access to data, access to advanced AI. Each of these steps that we talked about, like preclinical, clinical, and post-clinical, now we can accelerate that. So what happened in the COVID era is that almost all companies put at least some of their focus or all of their focus on this one disease. And then, so what happened was that we were able to identify, typically to design a drug, you need to find drug targets. And that has been able to do in much faster way, because we have been building these type of solutions over the years to do drug discovery. And then some of the things were like, we were already developing antiviral. So we knew that, what a good antiviral should look like. Or for example, for a vaccine, we already were looking at some of the similar types of vaccine that were the coronavirus belongs to. So in my opinion, the history or sort of that acceleration happened because we have a history of development in place, number one. Number two, we did what we call as quantum leap over the 2 years, because typically, like we talked about, it takes 10 years, it takes 2 billion. Cost-wise and time-wise, again, we had success, but I don't think any drug development effort in COVID would have costed any dollar amount less. I don't think so. But the time-wise, because we did pool all our resources to solve one problem, that definitely helped. And I can also tell you that things like that, for example, let's take natural language processing, a very fundamental technique in that we use all the time in business, right? So that, for example, has been employed to understand what was patient respond to certain type of COVID therapy. Was patient feeling better? So instead of you typically take 10 years to collect this information or 2 years to collect this information. Systems and methods and protocols have been defined or developed that will bring in this information from real time from patients, parse it, understand what patient is thinking, and then use that information. So just like a lot of things have actually contributed for that quantum leap. So in terms of science, in terms of technology, in terms of human resource, all of them contribute. And that's why, like I said, if you take the Spanish flu, for example, back in the days, it was quite challenging. A lot of people died in its first wave, right? Like now think about it, like we all have flu as an annual event in our lives, right? Like you may take, flu medicine, or you get a flu shot, or you'll wait for that to come and go. It became part of our life. So that's where, what I'm thinking, that quantum leap was possible now because of the history of science we were doing. And then we were able to put all our resources into one aspect. And I hope, like just like you mentioned, it will become as normal as flu eventually.
Right. So you're saying that the convergence of those various works, over the years has made it possible to accelerate drug development and deployment. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit because I'm going to stay in the pandemic and the COVID space. There's these movies, lots of movies, especially Hollywood, likes to show that zombies, where zombies are there. And today, you mentioned, the technology is like really making it accessible for anyone and everyone to kind of tinker around, even with the source code of life, because, we got something on CRISPR-Cas9 genetic editing, and we can kind of, tinker around, edit, add a genome. Just recently, I saw in the news that the scientists have revived and characterized 13 new pathogens, what they termed zombie viruses, and they found that they remained infectious despite spending many millions of years trapped in the frozen ground. So I just wanted to your views on this growing stack of knowledge where these tools are being more accessible for everyone. What is going to be the impact of that? And do you see that in the far out future that a gene could kind of mutate and a zombie could kind of come out of it? It's just, like a far out question, but just wanted your views on it.
Yeah. So great question. I'm a big fan of Hollywood movies, and for that matter, zombies movies in particular. And one of my favorite pandemic movies is actually a movie called Outbreak. I don't know if you've seen that. This movie probably came into the early 2000. In a way, talks about a similar respiratory virus that had a transmission from a bat to a pig, and someone consume uncooked pork or something, and then they get that, and then the virus spread around the world. And now fast forward in 2020, we have seen that happening. So movies are sometimes, a good way to do that sort of science communication, for example. So you've asked about that one part about the movie. The other thing, and as I was a kid, I still remember, probably I was in my 8th grade or so, going to this movie called Jurassic Park, the very first original, the OG Jurassic Park movie, where they showed this beautiful animation of they take a blood from a prehistoric mosquito that's been trapped in an amber, piece of an amber, and then they take that blood, they clone that, and they have this tiny little dinosaur baby that's coming out. Now, when I was that kid, I was fascinated by what they were doing. Fast forward now, you mentioned about CRISPR-Cas9 and some of these emerging genetic editing technologies. We can now do editing. You can do base editing. You can edit a small region of your genome. You can make sure, if you understand the mechanism, you can remove a portion of a particular gene. There are a lot we could do, and it has a huge, if we get a combination of that technology right, we are going to potentially, I'm being cautious here, potentially cure a lot of disease. And I'll tell you, and then I'll come back to your original question on the zombie virus. And the reason what I meant by that is there's a disease called cystic fibrosis, right? Like the lung get fibrotic tissue, and breathing will be difficult, and patients have a very difficult life. We know the disease. We know the gene that drives the disease, the genetic cause of the disease, but we don't have a therapy. But now everybody, maybe 30, 40 companies are trying to look into that. Can we use genetic editing to cure or potentially edit out or edit in, CFTR, cystic fibrosis gene? So is that there? Not yet. But around the world, different companies are trying for. So let's put on that for a second. So I'm really excited about what genetic editing is going to bring in, and in that whole group of therapies called living therapies would bring to the table, and computational aspects of bioinformatics or data science could play a significant role. For example, which region we should target, things like that. We often develop algorithms to do that. Now, coming back to the zombie virus aspect, and we often see this, especially in popular press, that, okay, in Amazon forest, we found a new set of virus. In some other places, we found a new set of viruses. And like you mentioned, these are prehistoric zombie viruses. People often have a confusion that why are we going into the Amazon forest, finding new viruses and destroying that, bringing that to the world? That's required, because then if there is a new class of virus that exists out there, we should better be studying about them. You were able to develop a drug, a vaccine, and a prevention strategy against COVID because we have been studying coronavirus for quite some time. Right? So it's extremely important for humanity that we study these viruses. And now coming back to the most important and the challenging part of your question, is there a chance for one of these quote unquote zombie viruses to come back to us? There could be possibility, and that people have done some modeling work on that. What is the scenario of something to come in, and in a way, COVID was a situation where it has high infectivity rate and significant mortality rate also. So we have seen that. Would it get worse than that? We don't know at this point of time what would that next virus would be, but outbreaks are happening as we talk then around the world. But there could be endemic disease outbreaks could happen, right? Will be happening, is happening right as we speak right now. And it's extremely important that we do trace, track, and audit the viral world, or rather the bacterial world around us, because it's extremely important. Otherwise, we won't have a clue about what's going to happen. So it's extremely important. We call that basic research or basic virology research. It's extremely important to do that. But right. Great question.
Right. Yeah. So I think, we as the human race, I think we always need to be a little one step ahead, because technology is getting more and more democratized, and there'll be always all kinds of people, who would want to kind of tinker around and do this thing. And you pointed out something about Hollywood. I think artists and creatives have this very uncanny sense of kind of predicting or kind of building that future. And then eventually scientists and researchers kind of say, okay, now technologically, it's possible right now, what they've seen in possible movies or books, which was written possibly 50 or 30 years back. And now it's kind of possible. And that's what's happening. I mean, the artists have these things, which is, you mentioning about genetic editing. Would you want to elaborate on that and its role? How do you think that, there's this saying, or there's this promise that once genetic editing becomes mainstream and becomes more accessible, it would completely eradicate all diseases? Is that something that you believe in?
No, there will be still disease threats to humanity, in my opinion. This is my personal opinion. But then that's where we have to think about what is genetic editing, how the world of therapeutics works. And I'll take a simple example. A few years ago, I had to go to a doctor for a medication for hypertension. So he gave me a medicine. It didn't work for me. Actually, my symptoms got worse, and then I have to go back to him, and then he gave me another one. And then he made a combination, and then that actually worked for me. And I'm sure almost every one of us goes through this exercise, right? Like, why is it happening? So what happens with the drug development is that, so even the most blockbuster drug, let's take, for example, statins are considered to be a $1 trillion drug in the world. There are patients who respond optimally to statin. There are patients who never respond to statin, and patients who have a mediocre response to statin. Now we are living in this sort of modern world. You go to a doctor's office, doctor do your vitals and everything. He prescribe you a medication. Doctor doesn't know preemptively. He or she doesn't know whether you are a good responder or a medium responder or a non-responder. But I'll tell you, we have technology to assess that right now. It was there like maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So there is a challenge in our field, especially in biomedicine. Even if you have a technology that's being developed from bench to bedside to come to patients, unfortunately, it takes almost 20 years, quote unquote, 20 years. There is a delay. And what is that delay? Just like, we have to make sure that we run clinical trial. We have a protocol, we run clinical trial, we bring this to the patients, and then making sure that let's say we have a test to understand drug metabolism by patients. It has to be available everywhere. Affordability matters, accessibility matters, accuracy of the test matters. So what happened with genomics and genetic editing, all of this was we were studying human disease, one disease at a time, and looking for gene responsible for that. For example, the cystic fibrosis is a good example. We knew that one gene is very important. So then we thought, okay, what if there is similarly in diabetes, what is happening? So we recruited 100,000 diabetes patients and 100,000 non-diabetes patients and took their DNA, sequenced their genome, or rather done genotyping back in the days. We basically look for what is their genetic difference between diabetes and non-diabetes. But then instead of finding one or two genes, we have seen several genes. And then when I move from European Americans to African Americans, I see different part of the genome is associated with it. When I came to Asia, within Asia, I'm seeing different clusters. So what happens is that, so we realize that genetics of human disease, simple disease, or even complex disease, is much more complex. It was not a single gene driven. It was most of the disease that we see, diabetes or hypertension or any of these, they are what we call as omnigenic effect. A lot of genes contributing small aspect, and then your lifestyle, your diet, where you live, all of this actually matters now. So now what happens? So that's one of the aspects. So now coming back to your question about genetic editing and genomic engineering aspects. Over the last 10 years, when I moved to the US for my postdoctoral training, I was at the Mayo Clinic. We've been looking into cardiovascular disease. What are the genetic basis of cardiovascular disease? I was working with Dr. Iftikhar Kolo and team, and we've done a lot of studies around this aspect. So we thought, how can we use this aspect, this information to improve patient lives? So we designed a clinical trial, where we took a group of patients, around 200 to 50 patients, and divided them into two, right? So it was a randomized control trial. And one arm received a a traditional risk score. What I meant by that is they look at your blood value, they look at your age, they look at your family history and say, okay, there is a 2-year risk for a heart disease or a 5-year risk for a heart disease. And the other one, we did this genetic sequencing, and then they told them, we gave them the normal risk score also. And by looking at their genome, we found that some of them are, even though they don't have any what you call other risk, visible risk, their genetic was saying that they are likely to have an event in 2, 5, or 10 years. And then we send them, we did some basic lab work. We exposed them to this information, and then we had them sit with the genetic counselor, and then genetic counselor will explain what a genetic risk means, what can you do about it. And some of them said, okay, since I have higher risk for a cardiovascular disease, I want to start some therapy now. And then we told them, all of them, to come back after 6 months, and then we measured their, let's say, lipid level and cholesterol, and we asked them whether they did more exercise. What happened? The patient who were exposed to genetic information had lower levels of cholesterol. You know what they did? They didn't exercise better. They actually started medication early. So that's just exposing the genetic information to a patient in real world, what will happen. Now, coming back to your question about, different aspects of genetic editing. The problem right now is we know where to edit. We still figuring out how best to edit, number one. Number two, the therapy that we are developing, what about its durability? Whether is it good for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, or for the lifetime? The genetic medicine field think it's going to be lifelong. You do it once and you'll be done. You don't have to take, blood pressure or, for example, cholesterol medication lifelong. You just do a gene editing once and done. You'll be going home and you're done for life, which is a better proposition for patients, maybe, depending on whom you ask. Like, some patients want that, some patients don't want that. Now comes back, so the ultimate question that you asked me was that, would genetic engineering, literally, close the case for drug development? I don't think so, because we call drug modality, or rather different type of therapeutic modality. The pill that we eat on, depending on the disease, is actually primarily they are small molecules. They are chemical entities. So we sometimes get, for example, the vaccines, like depending on which vaccine you got, if it's an mRNA, it's a nucleic acid or a sort of a biologics. We call it biologics. Sometimes you take an antibody as a drug, so that's again a biologics, for example. Sometimes you can take what you call as a gene editing as a therapy. So none of these therapies could give you 100% outcome in 100% of the patients, because we're all different. We have what we call as inter-individual variation. Like I said, when we did the genetic analysis, we found that it's not the same genetics driving diabetes around the world. There are shared genes, but there are different genes depending on your lifestyle, where you're coming from, what's your ancestry, depending on it. So my answer would be that it will help us to solve the case for certain diseases, but not for all. That would be my take.
Right. And you mentioned that, we are such complex beings, and there is so many things which is affecting us, the environment, what we eat, our lifestyle, and so on and so forth. So there is also this field called precision medicine. Do you think that once we have this precision medicine where we are tackling a person, would that be the way forward for the future of healthcare?
Fantastic question, and that brings to sort of you're bringing my career together. That's exactly the problem we're solving at Sanofi. So, for example, like let's say who is that patient who could get maximum benefit from this therapy, so we can target that population or subpopulation of patients where he or she is going to get the optimal benefit. that's, it's about time. We have been talking about precision medicine for, in my opinion, around 10 to 15 years now. Maybe within the next 5 years or so, we should be able to see precision medicine strategies for a whole lot of disease. Precision medicine is already, having said that, it's already happening in one way or the other in oncology space. A lot of advancement has been happened in oncology space. But for non-oncology disease, it's actually still have a lot of catch up to do. So precision medicine, within the concept, the brief description is that getting the right drug or therapy to that patient via right route at the right time to that right patient. So it's very simple, very straightforward concept. But can I get precision medicine? Because I'm someone who has done my genome sequencing, I've done my genotyping. There is no way I can take this to a physician because physician is not yet ready. Maybe there are a few of them out there that's ready, but we don't have clinical protocol. We don't have a way to cover in my insurance. So there is a lot of layers of complexity there that we need to solve. But I really hope that with the right balance of invention, technology, discovery, policy, and regulation, we will be getting closer to sort of that precision medicine space. And that's the hope. That's what we are working towards. And I'm really excited about what's coming up, especially for diseases like autoimmune disease or neurodegenerative disease, or even cardiovascular as well.
So the healthcare industry has been very passive, but today it's becoming more reactive, with DNA sequencing possibly becoming really, really cheap over the years. And you mentioned about how these accelerating technologies, like through AI, machine learning, the entire healthcare is going to be upended. So someone who's been invested in the space, could you share some examples of how AI, machine learning is being leveraged for healthcare?
I can tell you a specific example of a project that we worked in the past with Dr. Partho Sengupta, who's an echocardiographer. He's one of the leading echocardiographer in the world. So he came to us a couple of years ago when I was at Mount Sinai with Joel Dudley and his team, and working as a scientist there at Mount Sinai Health System, which is one of the largest health systems in the New York City area. The challenge, he was, Shamir, I have a problem. I'm an expert in diagnosing a particular type of heart disease. But then the way that I do is I look at this part of the image of the heart, and then I do this part, and then I change the gradient here, and then I revert this one. So he opened this 12-window situation, and he said, this is how I define this patient. So there is no way that I can teach this to some of my colleagues, right? Like, it's his intuition, because he's seen a lot of these images over the years. He's very passionate about that disease, and he is literally a human AI system to differentiate that particular type of two types of cardiovascular subtypes of cardiovascular disease. And then computer vision and all was like still sort of catching up. I'm talking about early 2014, like that. So we don't have a lot of advancements. There's still CNN and other convolutional neural networks and all still coming up and being applied, actually. So we're not yet in the digital pathology or digital imaging just yet. So one of the things we thought was we developed a system, an AI system, that mimic his diagnosis using a combination of different types of algorithms and methods. And then it was not like 100% accurate. Was it around 80-85% accurate? But then what happened was that we designed a protocol that we can have a system that can mimic his thinking to do that. And then we presented it back to him. And then the problem is, we cannot simply use an algorithm that's been trained on one physician and apply it to patients. That's not possible, right? So what we thought was, what if we could do this on a larger database, right? Like, and with different physicians have contributed to this, because everyone, do this diagnosis a little bit differently. So now what happened is that entire diagnostics procedure will take at least half an hour for a trained cardiologist. We can now have an AI system do that in a matter of minutes. Is that system perfect? No. Would it be predicted correct always? No. But then what happens is that it can tell you how confident that prediction is. Then if the confidence of algorithm is lower, a physician can step in and do the diagnostic. So we designed a human in the loop system. So the net saving is that a physician can do his job faster, a patient can get his diagnosis faster, treatment can be started faster. So that's a simple example that I can tell you in the diagnostic space. And then fast forward to almost every aspect of healthcare, whether it's patient monitoring, right? For example, you want to monitor patients in hospital. I can tell you an interesting example that we did again within the healthcare setting. So there is a concept of sitters in hospital, patient sitters. What I meant by that is patients who are either having after surgery or things like that, or even patients who are older. You need to have somebody next to them after their surgery or their procedure, because they might be already under anesthesia and all of that. And the sitter is required to sit there to make sure that the patient don't fall. So falls are actually a major challenge for hospitals, especially in the Western place, because we don't have anyone else in the room or within the hospital room. So can AI support this one? Can AI augment this? Instead of having a sitter always, can we have a combination of computer vision and other aspects around that? So that's, again, this was a sort of a patient need as well as an operational aspects as well. And the other thing I can tell you is that, similar to these two examples, hospital readmission in the United States, what happens with the readmission is that, let's say if someone came in for a treatment, let's say for heart failure, for example. So they stay in the hospital for 5 days or 5 to 10 days. After they go back, they're not supposed to come back for anything related to heart failure for the next 30 days. If they come back, then their cost of the care belongs to the hospital. Patient doesn't have to pay. And then that also, since the care was not up to the mark, that's the reason they are coming back. So the rating of the hospital will go down as well. So can you predict who is more likely to come back, so that we can either give them extra care or see what we can do? How do we triage patients that way? So similar to this, we've applied AI to a variety of use cases, all the way from clinical to operational to administrative aspect. Across the spectrum of healthcare delivery, we have applied different types of AI. And that, now what I'm doing right now within the pharma is we are bringing all of this together in pharma, because in pharma, what happens is that we need better clinical trials, we need better discovery. So we are using all this information to improve our clinical trials, improve our target discovery. The collective knowledge or the kind of work we have been building over the years are now being applied to pharma as well. So hopefully we'll have better, more optimized clinical trials. We'll have better therapies developed faster as well. Yeah. So it's a circle.
AI is being used for drug discovery. Would you like to elaborate on that and maybe talk about some of your works that you've been doing, at Sanofi?
So AI is being, used just like we mentioned about 3 main areas, right? Like, in preclinical discovery research, in clinical research, and then in post-clinical scenario. And in preclinical area, one of the, let's say we have a disease, right? Like, for example, you're interested in, just for our discussion purpose, let's say type 2 diabetes. And we have certain diabetes drugs. But we, like we talked about, we still need a better therapies, right? Like, for example, there are a subset of patients who don't respond to existing therapy. Patients need a new class of medicine. So how do we find it? So AI plays a critical role in mining data around a disease. So we build, for example, knowledge graphs around disease-specific sort of hypergraphs around a particular disease, and then see what are all the areas that's we have already developed drugs, and what are the areas we could potentially explore within a particular disease, for example, for diabetes. And then, but when you go to some other disease areas, for example, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, where we don't really have good therapies, which is a different problem, right? Like one is you have a few drugs already. The other, we don't have a lot of drugs actually. So how do you develop a drug for a disease like Alzheimer's? So you want to make sure you design a drug that, that if you're taking, it crosses the blood-brain barrier, goes to the brain, it does what it's supposed to do, and so that patient will feel better by taking that particular medication. So what happens in the discovery area is this entire research is done in different stages. So let's say if I identify a particular pathway associated with Alzheimer's disease. So now I wanted to know, where in this pathway should I target? What is my target gene or protein? And then can I block it? If I block, I get a better outcome, like patients have a better motor neuron activity, for example, or they have better memory skills when we do an outcome measurements. So you do a computational model. You look for pathways, you find targets, you design a molecule, and then you do test in cell lines first in a petri dish. If it's successful, you go to a mouse model. If it's successful, you go to non-human primates like monkeys and whatnot. And then from there, once everything looks good, then you take this to a small number of patients. You run what we call as a phase 1 assessment, phase 1 trial. And then you do a phase 2 and a little bit higher number of patients. You look for safety and efficacy. If that's also successful, you launch a phase 3 trial in a significant population, a few hundreds or thousands of patients. And if that's also, after that also, you have an outcome with that. And if it hits the outcome, if it's clinically beneficial, that drugs will be approved by whether it's FDA or any other regional agency will approve that drug. So this is done by an army of people, and this generates a ton of data, petabytes of data per project. If you start from a single disease, for example, Alzheimer's disease, that trajectory will generate a ton of data. There is no way a person can comprehend all that information. No single team can comprehend all that information. So that's where technology like, graph machine learning, for example, is actually helpful. So we use a variety of AI. In my opinion, we apply a variety of AI approaches within each of these analysis stages. And I call this AI nudges because instead of having a killer app that solves this entire problem, we have small modules of AI applied to this. And I can tell you, if you have a pathway and you have a drug targeting that drug, what would be my side effect in my phase 3 or phase 2? If I can predict that, I don't have to do all this investment because the side effect is going to be a severe or adverse event. That drug is not going to get approved. Right? So the idea is to apply AI to each of this step, whether it's to understand the disease, whether it's to find a drug target, whether it's to develop a chemical entity, whether it's to predict the clinical outcome. Can I use AI for that? And my short answer is yes, and a resounding yes. And each of this step individually. And there is no magical system that can do across this because people are trying to do that, trying to develop that. But again, it has its own challenges because the readouts in each steps are different. The phase 1 trial is only about safety, and the phase 2 is about safety and efficacy aspect. Phase 3 is where you look for all of the other aspects. But then, so let's say if I have one disease, Alzheimer's disease, I have one pathway, 20 genes or proteins. I've developed a 1,000 molecule. Only one of them has to be successful. But what if I use my AI and my AI helped me to find out of this 1,000, these 10 are the most important candidates. That's saving me time, money, and effort for 990. Otherwise, I have to test all 1,000 of them. The cost is, a factor of each molecule. You're talking about millions of dollars. So that's where AI is helping. It's nudging in every step of drug discovery and development.
Would you have any advice to students or organizations here in India who are looking at leveraging AI or machine learning for healthcare?
Sure, like I said, AI can have a huge impact because we often say that we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the computing power. I would say that's not true. Like I said, I picked up, I was trained in India, for my master's and my PhD, and I came here. And I can tell you that the places, like I said, I didn't have access to machine learning when I was a master's student, but I had to go to Pune. So India has access. You just have to be curious and reach out. I'm sure everyone will help, especially to students. I had a lot of mentors. That's not directly I had amazing mentors, blessed with amazing mentors. But at the same time, a lot of people I reached out either by LinkedIn or by sending email have helped me a lot. So I would say one aspect is that students should reach out, should be open, should be curious. And then, in my opinion, good to get a balance of two things. If you're interested in some of these applied areas of AI or ML, good to have a domain knowledge. It could be finance, it could be pharma, it could be medicine, it could be anything that you want to do. But along with that, strong AI skill. So if you're just only a pure vanilla AI person, the problem is you are a technical person. But if you bring in a domain expertise, your value will be 10x or 100x for that matter. So have passionate about whatever subject you're interested in. Doesn't matter whether it's physics, chemistry, or biology. Doesn't matter. Or even arts. Nowadays there is generative AI is applying to arts, and we have seen. But we need an artist to basically look through all that you've generated, right? Like it's not easy. So that core skill of being a human is extremely important. And then no AI, in my opinion, AI is not going to replace a drug discovery scientist or going to replace a physician. In my opinion, AI will replace a scientist or a physician who doesn't use AI at his work. So that's a difference, right? Like, so you still need doctors, you still need scientists, you still need artists. But AI is just another tool for you, So just have that exposure as early as possible. Collaborate, join community projects, and in my opinion, with all that available, like whether it's podcast or YouTube channels, or there are different avenues for learning. Believe in active and passive learning. In school and college you only learn certain things, but your passive learning matters, right? Like if you watch 5 AI videos, YouTube will give you 100 per day, because that's how the algorithms are designed that way, right? Like so it's extremely important that you do have a balance on both aspects. So that's one thing about I would love to be a student these days, because we did not have YouTube or whatnot back in the days. So there's a lot more avenues to learn these days. So it's really utilize all of that opportunity, and then build a website, build a robotic car, build a sculpture. It's extremely important to be into that culture of building, because that's I had what differentiate me in my school and in college days. Like I always believed in that aspect, and I was always doing something, one thing after the other. We've done a lot of projects during masters that helped me to get into a PhD program. That I did a lot of AI applications as a PhD student that helped me to find a postdoc program. So it always helps, because doing the academic work is one aspect, but being active and building things matters. So that matters too. And I hope universities and organizations would encourage that culture too.
Thank you, Shamir. Really, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast and sharing your learnings. It was a complete learning experience for me. If you had to paint a picture of what the healthcare industry would look like in the next 10 years, what would be your answer, and what's your roadmap, your moonshot?
It will become, my simple. I keep it very simple. It will be more precise, hopefully, and we can potentially give the right drug to right patients at the right time, so we can save that the experience we talked about throughout the session. I hope things will get more precise over the 10 years, and I hope we'll be better prepared for handling pandemics as well. So those are my two predictions.
So exciting times. So really appreciate you taking time being part of podcast. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Really appreciate this.